All right, guys, welcome this morning. We are going to be going over functional behavior assessment training, really important training for our work. Is doing our assessment is to figure out exactly what problems that need to be addressed, what problems we need to look at. And the functional behavior assessment, we start off usually really strong with this process. It's a big part of our behavior support plan, especially when we get a new VIP, a new client that we're working with. We go and we tackle this FBA process very strongly, but it should be something we do ongoingly, that it's never over. This process is always happening. Behaviors can change over time, behaviors can fall off, new behaviors are acquired all the time. So, and I feel like as clinicians, many times staff, family members, they look to us to kind of have the answer right away. They might come to us about a new challenging situation they faced since our last session, and they run up to us and they want that answer right away about what to do with the problem behavior, that a newly problem behavior maybe that just emerged. A lot of times, and we want to help, that's why we're in the field. We want to help. We want to be able to find that answer to their problem, but we need to sometimes bite our tongue and conduct this functional behavior assessment so we can figure out exactly if there's a problem at all, first of all, but also to figure out baseline data, to figure out how often this behavior is happening now, and then also determine the function behind this behavior so we can dictate the proper interventions. One second, please. All right, so let's get right into it. So there's types of assessments that we have to consider with functional behavior assessment. And we start it really with the indirect functional assessment. And when we mean indirect, what do we mean, guys? What do we mean by this indirect functional assessment piece?
It's information that we got from somebody else, not directly observed.
Yeah, thank you, Nadine. So this is information that we're gathering from the stakeholder, from the staff member coming up to us, the family member during session to let us know. It could also be data that's collected through someone else's eyes that we're reviewing now that we came onto session. So there's this indirect functional assessment. And if you look at this pyramid, it's really the base or the foundation of this assessment is conducting this indirect functional assessment. And this also could be us going out and interviewing, conducting interviews, using checklists, rating scales, questionnaires to kind of figure out where the problem may lie. So we can focus our thoughts and focus our observation on these certain behaviors that are of a problem that are being reported to us. So this indirect functional assessment is the base of the pyramid, right? It's our foundation. And we continue to kind of, as we move up the pyramid, narrow our scope and identify problems that are happening. So the next piece is the direct functional assessment or the descriptive assessment. And this is when we go out and see the behaviors for ourselves. We've kind of done this indirect piece where we've observed, we heard a ton about these behaviors, we collected data on them, family members, staff told us about them. Now we could focus on our attention on the behaviors that are being reported upon. But not only that, I'm going to keep my eyes open during this direct observations where I'm going out and seeing the behaviors for myself. I'm going to see if there's any other skill deficits or anything that could be improved upon. So obviously, maladaptive behaviors come to mind first and foremost. If I see, it doesn't have to be reported in the indirect assessment for me to target for in my behavior support plan. It could be something that I directly observe myself through my interactions working with our VIPs. So this direct assessment is going to us go out and it's kind of proving what we learned during this indirect functional piece. And we'll talk more about the direct functional assessment in a little bit. And then finally, at the top of the pyramid, which we do not conduct in our line of work, is a functional analysis. Still worth mentioning here is the very top of the pyramid, where BCBA and other trained professionals would conduct a controlled experiment to actually prove the function of these behaviors. And we never take it that far in our work. We just end at the descriptive assessment, and we develop a behavior support plan from the descriptive assessment. If you'd like to learn more about functional analysis, you could do a search on YouTube and you could see that controlled experiment in action. It's very interesting to watch, and it's very interesting how they put different experimental conditions in play to help prove a behavior, prove their hypothesis for why a behavior is happening. Very interesting stuff. But like I said, we're going to end things at that descriptive assessment. We're going to take what we learned during that descriptive assessment and develop our behavior support plan from that. Does anyone have any questions about the 3 types of assessment that we do during this FBA process?
No.
Thank you. So why do we do an FBA? Like, what's the purpose of this FBA? And we talked a little bit about this. I don't know why the font looks so strange on this. Does it look strange on your screen?
Yeah, it's kind of
don't
like
know.
all jumbled together.
I don't know why. That's so weird. Okay, so I don't know why the computer would even do that. Okay, so why FBA? So the main part of this FBA is determine the function of the behavior, and at least come up with a hypothesis statement for why this behavior is happening. Why is that important? Why do we care why this behavior is happening? We just want it to stop.
Because that's going to guide our interventions.
How?
Well, there's different function-based antecedent strategies. There are different function-based interventions in general.
Yeah, exactly. So if we determine the function or the reason why someone's engaging in a problem behavior, we could teach functional alternatives that would lead them to the same result that are more socially acceptable, socially appropriate. So developing determining or hypothesizing about the function of the behavior is very important for our work. And even though we might see the same behavior occur with different people, they could be occurring for vastly different reasons. So we need to kind of go into each case with a kind of a clean slate in our mind and not kind of have preconceived notions about why behaviors are happening, but actually prove or at least come to a hypothesis and educated guess about why these behaviors may be happening. 40% of all behaviors occur for multiple functions as well, multiple reasons. Another thing to consider. Interventions based on FBA may be more effective than selecting those without consideration of behavior function, right? And we talked a little bit about why that is, because we have evidence-based strategies that kind of will help replace these problem behaviors to lead to the same function as the problem behaviors as we're teaching this alternative. The FBA process is ongoing, right? So it's never ending. We're never stopping collecting data, evaluating our VIP's progress, keeping an eye out for new behaviors that may be emerging. So it's ongoing. It's a never ending process. It's important that during this FBA, we're gathering baseline information. How often behaviors are occurring right now? Why is that important? Why is it important to gather this baseline information? Anyone
Yep, place to start.
So thank you, Andy. So it's a good place to start. What are we going to use this baseline information for? First, tell us what a baseline is.
Sorry. Baseline data is the data you collect before you even implement an intervention so that you can compare both the results of the intervention to the baseline data you take before.
Yeah, thanks, Dee, and congratulations, Dee, on your master's
Yes,
degree. Well
Steve.
deserved. So the baseline data is how things are happening right now. So it's important that I gather a baseline. You know, for super serious aggressive behaviors, I would want a really quick baseline. And perhaps I wouldn't want this baseline to go on for a while. But for other behaviors, we might want to gather some baseline information about how often behaviors are happening right now. When I go out and meet with a VIP for the first time, I make sure I carry ABC data forms in my bag. And I'm going to be giving that to the stakeholders, to the staff to collect baseline data about ABC data collection and that's going to give me rich information about why behaviors may be happening and also tell me some baseline information about how often this behavior is happening. And I'm going to collect this during my direct observation too, which we're going to talk about a little bit. And Dee is so right that when we put interventions in place, we're going to compare how how our intervention is impacting the behavior. And without this baseline information, it's going to be very difficult to know if we're making significant lifestyle changes, which is the goal of our ABA therapy. So without this baseline information, without this information that we gathered before we put an intervention in place, we wouldn't know if the behavior is improving or not. So it's so important that we are having this baseline time where we're gathering this baseline data. Does anyone have any questions or anything to add about baseline data? Okay, and then we're going to consider the antecedent behavior and consequence, and that's where the ABC data sheets come in. I'm going to have the staff and train the staff or stakeholders to collect on what's happening just prior to the behavior, the behaviors that are occurring, and then what is the consequence, or what changes in the environment are happening just after the behavior. And this information is going to give me a lot of insight to why this behavior is happening, and also the baseline, or how often this behavior is happening right now. Okay, so that's why we should be doing FBAs. So, and I uploaded, the font is just so goofy. I think when we uploaded it, it got goofy. I don't know why. So Thomas is biting here. So this is Thomas Jefferson. This is a fan favorite slide of ours. And we get called in to work with Thomas by his wife, and his wife's name is Eleanor.
I have no idea.
I don't either, but we got
Yes.
called in. It's important we read the ISP, so we knew the players beforehand, right? But we didn't. We forgot Thomas's wife's name. That's okay. We're gonna roll with it. But we get called in, and we were conducting our interview, and it shows that Thomas is biting. That Thomas is engaging in biting behavior. It was very serious behavior. We want to address it right away. But we can't just put interventions in place. I can't tell Eleanor right away to put interventions in place, because I need to determine the function behind this behavior. I also need to see how often this behavior is happening right now. So what if we get called in and we collected ABC data and we see that Thomas is engaged in this behavior to get items like tangibles? What intervention might we use in that case?
Teaching them how to mand properly.
Teaching him how to mand, or to request appropriately for his wing. How might our interventions be different if he was biting to escape demands?
Teaching him to take a break.
We could teach him to take a break, to request to take a break, using our functional communication, but in two different ways. And without kind of determining why behaviors are happening, it would be very hard to know if we needed to teach Thomas to be able to request to lower biting, to request an item, or to request a break, or to be given a break. So based on the function of the behavior, our interventions are vastly different. So it's so important that we determine why these behaviors are happening. And we're going to be considering the ABCs of behavior, the antecedent behavior and consequence, like we said. So the steps of the FBA are gather information with indirect and direct assessment, and we talked a bit about that already. We're going to interpret information from the indirect and direct observations. We're going to create a hypothesis statement, and the hypothesis statement is just why we think this behavior is happening. And we're going to develop interventions based on the function of problem behavior, which we talked about as well. So the first part is this indirect assessment, and we mentioned this already. These are structured interviews, checklists, rating scales, record reviews, or questionnaires to obtain information from those who are familiar with the person exhibiting the problem behavior. And that the latter part of that is very important, because we want to make sure we interview someone who knows the person really well, someone that's been working with the person ongoingly, someone that has been with this person for a time. So family members, staff, people that know the person, that experienced some of the behaviors that we got called in to work on, have some information. And this is, remember, on our pyramid, the very base of the of the assessment where we're gathering that foundational information. But we have to remember and keep in mind always when we're talking to a staff, a family member, that this information is very unreliable in nature, that we shouldn't take this information all the time and develop treatment interventions based on just this indirect information because it's very unreliable. There's so many different examples that I could give you of why indirect assessments are very unreliable, but we get called into cases all the time. I know Joanne and I were dealing with the case recently where there was all these behaviors being reported and we would go out, we're collecting data and they're not happening anymore. We do not, these behaviors have not been, are not happening right now. So Joanne and I just chose not to work on these behaviors. So, you know, we're like, if behaviors aren't happening right now, there's no reason to develop a behavior support plan and interventions based on a behavior that's not happening now. So that's why we take this indirect information and move on to the direct assessment to actually show and see if these behaviors are still a problem. So just remember, this indirect is, and I don't want to discount the indirect, is very important, but we're also going to make sure we're going to go out and do direct assessments to prove that these behaviors are actually a problem. So here's some examples of indirect assessments, and these are just, the first one's the QABF, which is the form we use. It's our rating scale to talk about problem behaviors. This is going to help us determine the hypothesis, perhaps, of a problem behavior, at least give us some insight. And then the functional behavior assessment interview form, which is kind of our initial interview when we go out and interview the stakeholder about maybe some of the behaviors are happening. And if you don't have copies of these, we would be happy to send them over to you. They're also on our online portal for you to reference as well. Any questions about indirect assessment or anything to add that I missed? Okay, indirect. It's our foundation. It's a very important part. This happens very even nonchalantly. I feel like when you come onto session, if there was a problem that happened when you're not there, staff will come up to you and be talking to you about behaviors that have happened, hopefully not in front of the VIP, and consider all those things indirect assessments. So that is your indirect assessment and going to help you kind of prepare for the next phase of the assessment. Here's some, and you guys can review this. This is a crude picture from Cooper, and it's just going to show you the different rating scales that that are available to us to use, and the functions assessed, and different strengths and weaknesses of each one. So this is going to be given this PowerPoint's free to access for you guys, so you guys can review this whenever you like. The one we use is mostly the QABF, or questions about behavior function, which is across the bottom. So the next phase is the direct assessment, and the direct assessment encompasses direct observations of behaviors occurring under naturally occurring conditions. So in our FBA part, in our FBA section of our behavior support plan, the direct assessment is just us going out and doing an observation, is us going out and seeing the behaviors for ourselves. So it's important to go when behaviors are likely to occur. We don't want to go during a time where behaviors are unlikely to occur. We want to see the behaviors ourselves in action. And hopefully we have a more keen understanding about behaviors to be able to do a more thorough assessment compared to the indirect assessments that were given to us prior. So we're going to go out and conduct these observations and see behaviors for ourselves under naturally occurring conditions. There could be times when the VIP's on their best behavior because they have someone new there, right? Someone new. So sometimes we could sit away from them. We could pretend that we're not observing them and those kind of things. We could also ask with permission from the stakeholder or the guardian to record behaviors when we're not there, if possible. And I really encourage people not to send these videos electronically just for risk of it being seen by the wrong people, but just for you to see when you come on session so you can see the behaviors under naturally occurring conditions. And just going out and seeing the behaviors yourselves. I don't announce to like the VIP, like, okay, I'm doing my observation now, but I just say it to myself and I start to take notes about what I'm seeing during this direct assessment. And again, I'm going to notice any behaviors that were reported during this indirect phase. I'm going to keep my eye out for those. I'm going to see if those behaviors are happening during my observation time. If they are, I'm going to make sure I record upon them to get that baseline data collection. But I also want to keep my eye out for any other behaviors that might be that might not have been reported during this indirect phase, to make sure I could add them to my behavior support plan if needed. And they could be maladaptive behaviors. I'm also like recognizing where staff come in to kind of assist someone who may be able to do some of these tasks more independently. So if I notice staff coming in and assisting VIPs with skills that they could probably learn, also identifying those as potential behaviors that I want to work on in my treatment plan as well. And these could be some examples of direct assessment is ABC data recording. If I'm going out and I'm recording this data myself, it's considered a direct assessment. Continuous reporting ABC narrative recorders, scanning plot recording, but basically any kind of data collection that the clinician does when they're doing their direct assessment is a direct assessment piece that we're going to use and consider direct assessment. Any data collection that's given to us by other people, we have to consider indirect, that it's not super reliable. Does anyone have any questions so far about direct assessments or descriptive assessments, as they're called? I think they're called descriptive more routinely than direct.
No.
No? Anyone else? Okay. Here's some examples of direct assessment. And again, this would be the clinician filling this out. We have the scatter plot here. This is also an example of another type of data recording method, which is what? I always ask this to you guys. You guys remember? We have time broken into equal intervals. We have a problem behavior that's being recorded. We're going to mark an X in the box if it happened during that interval.
Is it partial interval?
Yes, I needed you there, Kerlin, and you came through.
I didn't
Yes,
look.
partial interval. If the behavior
Well, like it's
occurred,
either whole or partial.
remember, for problem behaviors, it's partial. Any part of the interval, partial, we're going to mark an X. So good job. Nice work. Partial interval recording is right here. And that's also a scatter plot. And why might it be important to see when behaviors are happening?
There may be factors during that time of day that are contributing to the behavior. Like if it's when they're first arriving at day program, it may be a transition issue from going from home to program.
Yes.
It's happening before lunch. It may be because they're anticipating lunch.
Yeah, so great answer. Yeah, so we're gonna notice like what's going on, what environmental changes are going on during this time frame, to be able to kind of learn more about the behavior and pinpoint our interventions. So that's a great answer. What's another good reason why we might want to know when behaviors are happening or when they're more likely to happen? Thinking about this assessment piece.
So we know when to come and do
Yeah. So we know when to go and do our observation, right? So we could be like, okay, in this case, I would want to go and observe this behavior occurring at 9 o'clock. And it looks like the hitting, actually non-compliance is these lines. And then obviously do an observation here at 12:30 as well. Just kind of see what's happening during the environment that could be triggering these behaviors. You know, we always see Charlie engage in this non-compliance during math class, but during reading, he seems to be good to go, you know? So what's going on in math class that might be contributing to this behavior? Without this information, we might go during reading and be like, this isn't even a behavior that's happening right now. And boy, would we be wrong. And then here's an example of an ABC data recording sheet that we would use to track the behaviors, recognize that we're writing a little narrative about the antecedent or what happened just before the behavior occurred, the behavior of concern, and also the consequence or what happened right after that behavior happened. And ABC data collection is used for maladaptive behaviors. And it should be an ongoing part of your work as clinicians and also to evaluate your progress with problem behaviors but also to recognize when new problem behaviors start to arise. A new behavior function. This ABC data sheet is going to help determine the function, the baseline, and see what's going on in between sessions and when you're on session. Does anyone have any questions about direct assessments? And again, for our work, our direct assessment is going out and conducting observations. It's going out and seeing the behaviors in the natural environment for ourselves. And remember, it's almost like a proof. And I see a lot of people do one observation during the FBA piece. You can do many more than just one. You could go out and during the whole month, I'm doing this FBA process. I'm going to go out once or twice a week and conduct many observations to help prove that the stuff in the indirect information from the indirect phase is actually a problem when I go out and observe it myself. Any questions about direct assessments or anything I missed? Okay. So we need to consider after we kind of complete these two steps and we'll feel confident that we know the hypothesis for the behavior or the function behind the behavior, why the behavior is happening. It is our job to develop a hypothesis statement to figure out the function of behavior. During supervisions with me, when you guys present me with the behavior, one of the first questions I ask you is why do you think the behavior is happening? What's the function behind this behavior? Because that's going to help dictate and help pinpoint in my mind what interventions would be most useful for this particular VIP. And can you imagine if we just picked interventions out of a hat? We had like this generic approach well, think about even a doctor, for instance. Can you imagine going to see a doctor and the doctor doesn't conduct any tests or assessments to figure out what's wrong with you when you go see the doctor, right? They don't do any tests or assessments, but they just give the same intervention to everyone. They just go out and any person that comes into their office, they recommend to take Tylenol, for instance. So that's their intervention they're doing with everyone. How often do you think that doctor is going to miss the mark?
Just all the time.
Yeah, all the time, right? So don't be that clinician that is giving out interventions right away without coming up with this hypothesis by going through all these assessment pieces here to figure out why this behavior is happening so we can make the best educated guess possible. Because we don't want to be that doctor that's prescribing the same interventions for all these different people and all these different behaviors happening. And if you guys have that experience with your doctor, I would recommend getting a new doctor. So the function of behavior, we want to figure out exactly why the behavior is happening to the best of our ability. We want to consider if it's socially mediated or automatic. And when we say socially mediated, what do we mean? How is a behavior socially mediated?
Created by the attention they're receiving from everyone else.
It could be attention, but it could be any other of the other functions too. But what was the key piece there? Someone else, right? So
Yeah,
when
the environment.
It could, yes. So the environment. So socially mediated just means that the consequence, and remember, consequence or the reinforcement is what's maintaining a behavior over time. So the consequence is being delivered through someone else. That's what socially mediated means. So if I ask a question to my teacher, she answers that question. Well, that's socially mediated reinforcement. It's reinforcement if I continue to ask that question in the future. But it's socially mediated because the consequence is being delivered through someone else. Can someone give me another example? Well, I have a question here about socially mediated positive reinforcement. So can someone give me an example of a social, and it could be any example, of what kind of consequence might be delivered through social mediation?
Attention.
Yes, attention. Attention has to be socially mediated, right? Because we can't like automatically be delivered attention. So all socially mediated behaviors have this attention component. What's another example?
Tangible.
A tangible, like what? Well, tangible. What kind of tangible? Can you give me a more a better
Like
more
to get access to something, like to toys, food, you need someone to get that, yes. Like I think
perhaps
items.
perhaps. So what could be an item that could be delivered socially mediated through social mediation? Well, I'm a big foodie, and what came to my mind was like at the restaurant, right? I go into a restaurant and I order food from the waitress or the waiter, and they bring over the food. Well, that food was delivered through social mediation that I had to go through someone else to access the reinforcement or the reinforcement. So that's what social mediation is all about. Think about a teacher that gives you a big, well, this wouldn't be positive reinforcement, but socially mediated negative reinforcement. Say the teacher gives us this big long math sheet to do, and all the kids start complaining about it, and that's the behavior. And the teacher said, hey, you could just do the evens. You don't need to do the whole thing, do the evens. And that could provide us some relief in the form of negative reinforcement. And the teacher had to deliver that. So that's socially mediated negative reinforcement. So, and we have to consider automatic reinforcement. So if socially mediation is that the consequence is being delivered through someone else, what do you think automatic is all about?
Automatic is when it feels good to the VIP, right?
Well, it could be, but it doesn't have to be.
Self-delivered. So they're receiving it, them giving it to themselves, if that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. That does make sense.
Like it
Yeah.
could be like making a discomfort go away, like in each or something like that.
That could be, yeah. So just think it socially mediation is that the consequence or the reinforcement's being delivered through someone else. When I say automatic reinforcement, the consequences just be delivered through the behavior I engaged. So don't think too complexly about this. I could walk into a room, my office here in the morning, and it's still kind of dark out. So that's kind of I need to fix that environment to make it more work friendly. So what do I do? What do I do when I walk into my dark office?
Turn the light.
lights on.
On the light.
Turn the light on. So was that consequence? And what happens? The room fills with light. So is that consequence being delivered through someone else or through my behavior?
Through your behavior.
Right. So that's considered automatic negative reinforcement. A dead giveaway most of the time is if the behavior is happening when no one else is around, right? That could be an indication that that the consequence is being delivered through automatic methods, automatic reinforcement, right? So, and you gave the example I liked a lot of, you have that itch, you have that scratch that you're feeling, right? So you engage in a scratch, and then that itchy feeling is taken away, and you delivered that consequence through your own behaviors. You required no one else, so that's automatic reinforcement. The other thing we have to consider with our hypothesis statement is positive and negative. And what do we mean by positive and negative? Do we mean that's good and bad?
It's adding and removing. So
Yes.
positive will be adding something, and the negative will be removing something.
Yeah, that's so right. So when we have something added to the environment as a consequence, like attention, a drink, Uno cards, something is added to the environment, well, that's positive reinforcement. Behaviors and then if something is taken away, especially something aversive, an antecedent that's aversive is taken away, well, that's negative. That something is being taken away from my environment. So think about positive and negative as kind of a math problem. Something's added, it's positive. Something's taken away, it's negative. And think about, and there's also different effects on behavior, whether a behavior is being positively or negatively reinforced. that we'll get into another time. But those are the two pieces of this that we need to consider when coming up with our hypothesis statement for our VIPs. Is this consequence being delivered through social mediation, or is it being delivered automatically? And if it's being maintained by positive or negative reinforcement. And again, it could be both. Does anyone have any questions or anything to add about the hypothesis statement? And we'll talk, we of course will talk about all these ideas of supervision as well. So finally, the last thing we're going to review is the baseline data information. And this is, and you guys probably, if you've been with me for a time, you've probably seen this graph many times before, but I created this graph a long while ago at this point to kind of hit home the importance of our baseline phase. And this is an example of an A-B graph, an A-B design. And here we have our graph, and we have three behaviors: hitting, property destruction, and self-interest behaviors. And we recorded upon these behaviors during this baseline period that we wanted to see what was happening right now. And these were behaviors that were reported to us during the indirect phase. So we started collecting on how often these behaviors were happening right away, and we graphed them, which is a very good idea to do with our work, because we want to demonstrate these patterns of behavior. So we have these two behaviors down here, right? We have this blue one, which is hitting and property destruction behavior. And we notice that the hitting behavior has shown an increase over time, that this behavior is increasing since I started at the beginning of the year with this person, that the behavior is going up over time. So what is this an example of? What effect is this behavior receiving as a consequence? If you see, yes, thank you, reinforcement. So this is what reinforcement means. Many times people come in, they don't know exactly what reinforcement means. I didn't when I first started in the field. A lot of people have different ideas about reinforcement, what reinforcement means, but this is what it is. This is what it looks like, that the behavior goes up over time. And if we see this effect on behavior, we could determine that this behavior, this problem behavior, is being led to reinforcement because we see an increase of it over time. So this is an example of what reinforcement is. And we have this behavior 4, it's going across property destruction behavior. It's happening about 4 times every session. And this is also maintained by a consequence, it seems. So what is this an example of? Anyone?
Your interventions are working?
Well, this is before interventions are in place.
Reinforcement.
Yes, reinforcement again. So if I see these effects on my graph, the behaviors are going up over time, or behaviors are being maintained over time, well, these are 2 examples of what reinforcement is. So I could say that these behaviors are actually problem behaviors that I want to work on. And we have this behavior, which is self-injury, and we notice over time during our baseline phase that the behaviors are being reduced over time, that slowly they're going down naturally. So think about how all 3 of these behaviors were presented to you as problems during the indirect phase. When we go out and we do our direct observations and continue to collect on the data, we determined that this behavior is being reduced over time, which is the opposite of reinforcement. So when I go to write my behavior support plan, what behaviors should I include in it? And what behavior might I omit from it?
You're
Should I
gonna-
include?
Self-interest,
Sorry,
Oh, no.
self-interest behavior.
Go ahead.
Everyone talks at the same time, you know, so it's so weird. So I'm going to omit what I'm not going to include all of them, right? I'm only going to include the ones that are what? Being maintained by what?
Reinforcement.
That's right. I'm only going to work on the behaviors that are maintained by reinforcement. And without this baseline phase, an amateur clinician would have put all 3 of these behaviors in their behavior support plan because they did not collect baseline data and they didn't realize that this behavior is naturally being reduced over time. So we don't need any special interventions for a behavior that's being reduced over time. We have these 2 behaviors that are problem behaviors that are being maintained over time or that are being reinforced over time. Well, these are the 2 behaviors I'm going to select for my behavior support plan work. So this is where our baseline information is very important for us to collect because we want to see exactly what problems are worth addressing, what problem behaviors are worth addressing, and which ones I need to steer clear from. Because I could put an intervention in place for this behavior and it could cause the behavior to start becoming reinforced. And it was already being reduced through natural means. So when I talk to family members in this case, I would say, hey, the self-injury is already being reduced. Keep doing exactly what you're doing because it's not having that reinforcing effect. Now, the property destruction and hitting behavior are 2 behaviors that are being maintained and increased over time. Those are the 2 behaviors I'm going to focus on for my behavior support plan. Does anyone have any questions about this baseline portion of the FBA? Okay, recap. Collect data on the ABCs of behavior and complete the FBA process, which is doing indirect and direct assessments. Determine the function behind the behavior and gather baseline information about how often this behavior is happening now. And then finally, meet with your coordinators, meet with your director, meet with your BCBAs to develop a behavior support plan to come up with interventions based upon the hypothesized function of these problem behaviors. And also come up with ideas and strategies for other skill deficits that you have identified during this FBA process. Here are the references that I used for this training. Does anyone have any final questions about the FBA process before we part ways?
No.
No questions.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate your participation and your attention this morning. And if you have any questions moving forward, please never hesitate to reach out. I hope you guys have a good rest of your week and a great day.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Have a good day.
Thanks.
Have a good
Take
day.
care.
Have a good one.